who sinned, or who was blind. Jesus slips away out of the temple grounds, and as he did so, he noticed a man, a blind man, from birth. Now, how did they know that he'd been blind from birth? We're not told. Either he was well known, so that it was known that he was blind from birth, or his blindness was such that it could have been seen that it happened at birth. However, it did require an explanation. Look at verse 2, chapter 9. Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he was born blind. Right? Who sinned that he was born blind? They're asking the question. Look at Psalm 51 and verse 5. Keeping your finger in John 9 so you don't lose the thread of the story there. Psalm 51 and verse 5 we read, "Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me." Who sinned that he was born blind? The Old Testament Psalms are saying, I was sinful from my birth. So in the answer that Jesus gives to this question, he shifts the focus from who sinned to the purpose of the blindness. Right, so Jesus shifts it, because it's not about who sinned at all. It's about the purpose of the blindness. And he says in verse 3 of John 9 that the work of God might be displayed. That the work of God might be displayed. It's about God and what God can do. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happens so the work of God might be displayed in his life. You know, we ask the question sometimes, why is this, whatever it is, that's going on in our lives, why is it happening to me? For what purpose is this taking place? We're going through some difficulty, it might be illness, it might be we've lost our job, it could be an accident, all kinds of things that take place in our lives we get frustrated about. Why? And how can God be glorified through the situation that you are now in? And if we think of this phrase again, who sinned that he was born blind? That word "that" could express one or two different ideas. First of all, it could mean, does it express a result rather than a cause? Who sinned that he was born blind? Cause would be, if he sinned, then he was born blind because he sinned. Right? A result could be, this is why. This is the result of it. So, in other words, you could say then, as a result of his suffering, the works of God will be made manifested. You with me? The result of this is not because of his sin that he was born blind. The result is so that the work of God is made manifest. William Barclay, in his commentary on this, says, thinking about, the things that happen to us in life, it's not necessarily anything to do with the fact because we've sinned at all, that you are getting that as a result. It could be just so that the work of God can be glorified, displayed. And he actually says, as William Barclay, in regard to all those that have died as martyrs, he asked the question, why? Was it because they were sinners that they died as martyrs? No. They died as martyrs so that the work of God. In other words, he says, come and see how a Christian can die. Come and see how a Christian can die. When life hits us a terrible blow, can we show the world how a Christian lives? That the work of God can be displayed in our lives. Night is coming and we can't work when it's night. We have to take full advantage of light. And Jesus had only 3 years. He took full advantage of the 3 years he had. Before communism came to Russia, when there was light, how did the Christians work? Before the revolution in France took place, while there was still light, how did the Christians work? And in a similar way, we don't know what's round the corner. So are we taking advantage now of the light? Verse 6 tells us that Jesus spat on the ground. Now the ancients believed that saliva, especially saliva when you've been fasting, you've been going without food for a while, right, had healing properties. Quoting William Barclay's commentary on John, says, Pliny, the famous Roman collector of what was then called scientific information, has a whole chapter on the use of spittle. He says that it's a sovereign preservative against the poison of serpents. It's a protection against epilepsy. That lichens and leprous spots can be cured by the application of fasting spittle. That ophthalmia can be cured by anointing the eyes every morning with fasting spittle. That carcinomata and crick in the neck, there's a good one, crick in the neck, I got that at the moment, right? Can be cured by the use of spittle. Spittle was held to be very effective in averting the evil eye. Perseus tells how the aunt or the grandmother who fears the gods and is skilled in averting the evil eye will lift the baby from his cradle and with her middle finger apply the lustrous spittle to the forehead and slobbering lips. The use of spittle was very common in the ancient world. And to this day, if you think about it, if you burn a finger, what's your first instinct? You put it in your mouth, right? You scratch your finger, in it goes, right? And there are many today who actually believe that warts can be cured by licking them with fasting spittle. The fact is that Jesus took here what seems to be method and customs of the time, and he used them. Matt might say that he was wise, because a physician is going to, do something that people believe in, right? But of course we know that Jesus didn't need to do that. When you think about it, the miracle of this was that when the guy went to the spring, that's when he saw. It wasn't the fasting spittle at all. It was when he went there. It was when he washed, so it was different. In that regard, because it should have been the fasting spittle that gave him his eyesight, according to their belief. But he took this, even though he wouldn't have believed in those things, but probably it kindled an expectation in the patient. Of course, quite often not, the efficacy of a treatment often depends at least as much on your faith in the doctor as it does on the drug itself, and they've proved that. So he is working against the traditions of the elders, is Jesus, isn't he? And the tradition of the elders here is to use fasting spittle. But if that was the case, they would have done it already with this blind man. Why hadn't anybody ever done it before? Because the point is here, he was blind from birth. There is no cure for someone blind from birth. And Jesus then says to him in verse 7, go. And he tells him go to a specific place, right? To the pool of Siloam. Now, it actually tells you, if you look at the translation there, sometimes it's in brackets, what the word Siloam means. What does it mean? Sent. Yeah. And Siloam is Greek. That's a window, but if you're French, it's a fenetra. Same word, just sounds different. Siloam in Greek, but in Hebrew it's Shiloach. It's the same thing, right? But sounds different, right? And the verb Shiloach, right, from which shalak comes, means to send. To send. So, in Greek it means sent, in the Hebrew it means to send. Before the pool of Siloam existed, the only source of water was the spring of Gihon. And that was in the Kidron Valley. And then 33 rock-cut steps were cut to lead down to it. later on, under Hezekiah, you'll have heard of Hezekiah's tunnel, a cut tunnel was made to carry water through into the city from the pool of Siloam. So you have to go down these 33 rock cut steps to get to the pool of Siloam, to that well. But they put this tunnel through, so the water in Siloam then was sent. It was sent down the tunnel. Jesus sent the blind man to send. You've got this play on the words. He sent him to send, because it means sent. And this mention of sent is indeed of interest in the story, because not only does Jesus send him to the pool of Siloam, which means sent, but in a sense, he is sent as well to his neighbours, probably which included his family, who are mentioned in verses 18 to 23. Right, in the reading there, verses 18 to 23, was all about his family. He is sent to them. He is sent to the Pharisees in verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man. He was sent to them. Right? The neighbours brought him, who were concerned probably because this man had been healed, not just on any day of the week, but on the Sabbath. You know, that's us, isn't it, sometimes? You know, just like these neighbours who brought him because he'd been healed on the Sabbath. You know, we're more bothered about rules rather than salvation. Praising God would have been better than bringing him to complain to the Pharisees that he'd been healed on the Sabbath, right? You know, somewhat callous and closed attitude like that still exists today. And there are people like that who will condemn anyone whose idea of religion isn't theirs, because theirs is the only way of serving God. So they brought him to complain. And of course, the Pharisees, you know, begin to ask him questions about this, and even they still don't believe it. So what do? The parents are sent for. Again, sent. And why? Because the debate has started. The one sent, who was the blind man, the one that was sent, is being used by the Holy Spirit. He's being used by the Holy Spirit to say things which will result in division over who Jesus is. If he's from God, in their eyes, then he wouldn't break the Sabbath. See, amongst the 39 activities that were prohibited on the Sabbath, one of them was kneading. You know, like kneading dough. Right? And Jesus had done that with the mud. He made spittle, he kneaded. It's not lawful to put such, according to their own rules, right? As to fasting spittle, it is not lawful to put it so much as upon the eyelids. That was one of their rabbinic traditions. Yet, how could someone do such a miracle if they were not of God? So he can't be of God because he did it on the Sabbath. But then the question is there, well, how could he have done it if he's not of God? So they call his parents. And this was to find out if this miracle was indeed genuine. Because if it wasn't genuine, if his parents said, well, he never was blind, you know what I mean? Then of course, dilemma is solved. But the parents are not forthcoming. It actually makes a mention there, you know, they were afraid because of the fear of excommunication. You know, that was a minimum of 30 days from the synagogue. Meant you couldn't go into the synagogue for 30 days if you were excommunicated. And that was a minimum. The maximum, there was no end to it. So they gave no answer except to verify that their son could now see. They then told the Pharisees to talk to him. Talk to the lad himself. He is of age, right? So that indicates that he probably was a young man. He's not, you know, somebody in his 40s or whatever. You know, he is of age. So he probably was, what, 16, 17, 18, probably around that sort of age. A young man, maybe even a bit younger. Because they had their bar mitzvah at the age of 12, don't they? So he could even be as young as 13. He is of age. Talk to him instead. And then, as a result of them saying that, this leads to another scent. Because as the once blind man is then summoned, right? He's summoned to appear before them again. Verse 24. The Jews gathered about him saying, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ... Sorry, I'm reading the wrong chapter. Chapter 9, verse 24, we can get chapter 10. A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. The second time they summoned, right? So he was sent again. And they want this time to coerce out of him. To give glory to God. Tell the truth. You know, we have that saying, don't we, today? Tell the truth and shame the devil. This is what they're trying to do with him. Give glory to God. Tell the truth. But once the blind man raises their anger again, because he says to them, do you want to be his disciples too? You know, that's interesting, isn't it? You know, it suggests that he decided to become a disciple of Jesus Christ himself as a result of what happened here. And he says to them now, well, do you want to become a disciple as well? And that enrages them even more. He'd chosen to be a follower of the prophet who had given him sight. But as yet, you know, he hadn't even seen him. He hadn't seen him yet. He'd heard him. He'd felt him. He hasn't seen him. But he's been brave, isn't he? He's taken a stand against these men. Even he retorts in verse 30, NIV says, now that is remarkable. Right? He says to them, that's remarkable. King James says, herein is a marvellous thing. You don't know where he came from. And yet, he has opened my eyes. The incontrovertible evidence of testimony, you cannot argue with someone's own personal testimony. He may not understand everything, but this man cannot and does not deny what happened to him. He doesn't deny his testimony to the man who actually did this to him. So let's look a bit more at what he says. Right? You don't know where he comes from. Okay? You know, I tell you, they say, he's saying to them, you're saying you don't know where he comes from. That in itself is contradiction. Because if you look in the same Gospel, chapter 7, and verse 27, you see there, they are saying, the people, we know where this man is from, talking about Jesus Christ. When the Christ comes, no one will know where he's from. So they know where Jesus is from, and here they're now saying, to this man, about, they don't know about him, and he says to them, you don't know where he comes from. They contradict themselves. They do know where he's come from. And he makes this comment here about the fact God doesn't listen to sinners. This is what this once blind man is saying. God doesn't listen to sinners. And that's the true statement in their eyes. Let me show you the evidence for that. Look at Psalm 66. Verse 18. If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. God doesn't listen to sinners. Psalm 34:15. Verse 15. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to whose cry? Their cry. Proverbs 15:29. Proverbs 15 verse 29. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. And the last one, Isaiah 1:15. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 15. when you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you offer many prayers, I'll not listen. Your hands are full of blood. God doesn't listen to sinners, this man says. You know, we just read all those passages there. So if this man who's given me sight is a sinner, God doesn't listen to sinners. So for this once blind man, he lays an argument that they can't contradict. Jesus cannot be a sinner. Else he wouldn't be able to and couldn't do this. He must be, as it says in verse 33 of chapter 9 of John, from God. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So as there in verse 31, we know that God doesn't listen to sinners. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. Because remember, in their eyes, the very fact he was born blind meant that he was a terrible sinner, or at least his parents were. That's why. So that, you know, God isn't going to listen to somebody who is such a terrible sinner. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. And you know, if you just go back to John 3 as an example on this, Nicodemus came to Jesus himself. And in verse 2 of John 3 he says, Rabbi, we know you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one can perform the miraculous signs you're doing if God were not with him. So he must be from God if he can do these things. Slowly, this man is discovering for himself more of who Jesus is, or was. What's happening, bit by bit, more is being revealed, and he gains more confidence to witness for Jesus. Look in verse 11 of John 9. It says there, he replied, the man they called Jesus. Then a little bit later on, as things are going on, right, you get to verse 17, and this is his words. This is the blind man who's been healed. Says, finally they turned to him, to the blind man, what have you to say about him? And he says, he's a prophet. So he moves from the man, he's now a prophet. Then verse 33 we read, if he was not from God, he couldn't do anything. He's from God. And we're going to see more in a moment. So the Pharisees were not going to be shown up by this layman. They have no answer. And they turn instead now to insult and to abuse. So they throw him out. They excommunicated him from the synagogue, which was mentioned there in verse 22 about, you know, if he didn't, they would do that. And as the Pharisees cast him out of the temple, then the Lord of the temple came and found him. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, Jesus searches for the one sent. Interesting, isn't it? The one who had been sent, Jesus is searching for. A lost sheep of the house of Israel is found by the good shepherd. You know, listen, if any man, if any woman, as a result of their witness, finds their witness, separates them from men and women, then note it will not and does not separate you from Jesus Christ, but it brings you nearer to him. Jesus is always true to those who are true to him, and loyalty will bring a revelation. He has revealed himself to this man. Do you believe, he said, in the Son of Man? Well, who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I can believe in him. You have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking to you. Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Just notice those stages again. The man named Jesus. A man among men. The man named Jesus. The man named Mervyn. The man named Roger. Just a man amongst men. The man named Jesus. But then Jesus the prophet. The one who brings God's message to man. The one who lived close to God and has penetrated into God's counsels. Jesus the prophet is the Son of Man, or the Son of God. the Son of Man who he then worshipped. For the blind man, light had come into his life. He had experienced what Nicodemus came seeking for in chapter 3, a new birth, to be born again. He found it, and he worshipped. 4 questions as we come to a conclusion. Who sinned that he was born blind? That was the question of verse 2. The Pharisees, after hearing Jesus say to the once blind man, I have come into the world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. That's verse 39. Said, are we blind too? And Jesus responded to the Pharisees by saying, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty of sin. Notice how the whole thing's been turned on its head. Who was sinful that this man was born blind? Jesus responded to the Pharisees, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. Question, who were blind? The Pharisees. And their blindness remained, whereas the blind man could see. Third question, who sinned? The man who was born blind? No. That happened so that the work of God might be displayed. That man's house was burnt down, children, so that God could do something to save him. This man was born blind so that God's might could be displayed. He saw, and his sin was removed. So, last question, who sinned? So who sinned? Those who were still blind and claimed that they could see. By their stubborn refusal to accept the reality of the power of God, they showed that they were blind. So who is blind? Who sins? The one saint obeyed Jesus and was blessed by Jesus, recognized by Jesus, and followed and worshipped Jesus. The one saint, go, said Jesus, wash. And he who was blind, he who was a sinful man, could see, and his sin did not remain. It was washed away. And you know, Jesus would send you and me. He would send you and me to wash. He would send you and me to our knees for forgiveness. Because that's what this man was healed of, isn't it? His sin. Because if we go to our knees for forgiveness, then we will see.